Namaste. I'm Reverend Wendy Craig-Purcell here at the Unity Center in beautiful San Diego. Thank you so much for subscribing to this channel. Please make sure that you like the video you've just watched and consider making a contribution on our app or on our website. It's really easy to do, and thank you in advance for that support. It does make a difference. So this series I'm really looking forward to sharing with you, remaining poised under pressure.
I'm sure I understand.
Well, Siri, pay attention. That's not the first time that Siri's responded, but she hasn't in a long time from the platform. But I have been wanting to share some of these ideas with you for actually a few years. I had the draft of these lessons in my file for quite some time because this whole concept to me of remaining poised under pressure really comes from my personal and my family's experience in the practice of a martial art called Aikido. How many of you are familiar with the martial art of Aikido? So Aikido was founded by a Japanese gentleman. His name was Morihei Ueshiba. He was born in the late 1800s, and he was a very, very accomplished martial artist. He was accomplished in all of the then common martial arts, and he was seldom defeated in his practice. But he had a turning point in his life as he was defeating people through his practices of martial arts, not Aikido at the time. And his awareness was that winning over fighting, winning by downing your opponent, was not really congruent with what he believed and what he felt spiritually. And he began a different kind of journey and a different kind of quest. And out of that journey and out of that quest became this martial art called Aikido. And the very word Aikido means the way of harmony and love. I was first introduced to this concept or this practice of Aikido in a Unity church, in our Unity church, way back when we were meeting in Mission Valley in our rented space. So this goes back more than 30 years ago. I had invited a speaker to come and present a workshop, and his name was Tom Crum. He was the author of a book called The Magic of Conflict, and he would go all around the country teaching corporations and their employees how to deal with conflict in the workforce. But he would also present these very same ideas to spiritual communities because the ideas were grounded in, the ideas were grounded in spiritual awareness and spiritual practice. Tom Crum was actually a black belt, many levels of black belt Aikidoist. And so everything that he would teach in his seminars came out of his experience and his knowledge of the spiritual underpinnings of this martial art. And so I became fascinated by it and by the examples that he gave and by the application of the principles without even having to do anything with it physically. And so many, many years passed, and I was aware of the teachings. I had read his book, and we had kids, and we wanted to introduce her to a physical activity. Well, if you're a minister and you have kids and you want your kids involved in physical activity, nowadays it's really hard to find something that does not require that they go to practice on Sundays. And that's rather difficult for me and was difficult for us. And then I remembered Aikido. And so we brought our kids into Aikido, and it became very much a part of our lives, including mine. I actually took it up as a practice myself. And the reason I did is I had been so involved in spiritual practice by then for decades. I had my prayer practice, my meditation practice. I knew all of Unity's principles and beliefs and teachings. But I felt I wanted to feel it, the practicality of it in my body. I wanted to feel what non-resistance really is. I wanted to feel what true strength and stability really were. And Aikido was a way for me to be able to do that. And so I want to share with you in this series some of the things that I came to understand and I came to learn that I still apply. I don't practice physical Aikido anymore. It was a little brutal on my shoulders. There's a lot of rolling and throwing in Aikido. It looks like a dance, but there's a lot of rolling and throwing. And the whole physical part of the practice has at its core the deep desire to not harm your opponent. Now take that in for a moment. A martial art, but its deep foundation is to not harm your opponent. It's to protect yourself, but in the desire to protect oneself is also held the desire to not hurt the other, to be able to protect oneself if protection is needed without hurting the other. It's a very rigorous practice. It's also one of the more complicated martial arts because it's not about brute strength. It's about finesse, it's about awareness, it's about mindfulness. In Aikido, there's actually this idea of shapes of movement, and we're going to get into that a little bit here as well. The idea, though, of being able to remain calm and poised under pressure is such a practical gift. Would you not agree? You know, when you think about the things that happen in our lives that are challenging and difficult and get us frustrated and upset, we lose so much peace of mind when we fall prey to that. We really lose our clarity of thinking when we fall prey to that. But to be able to move through one's life experiences, remaining centered and strong and grounded, is a tremendous gift. And it doesn't come without practice. It does require practice. But the benefits of it is that we then have a solid foundation on which to move forward. I'm reminded of one of Jesus' teachings that comes in toward the latter part of the Sermon on the Mount. He's given the Beatitudes. He's given all these very practical teachings about not judging and all of that. And then he says this, "Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rains came, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. But everyone who hears these words of mine and does not put them into practice is like a foolish man who built his house upon the sand. The rains came, the streams rose, the winds blew and beat against that house, and that house fell with a great crash." He's contrasting, right? The difference between building one's life on a solid foundation and not building one's life on a solid foundation, and learning how to remain centered and calm and grounded in the midst of pressure or the midst of the onslaught of life is the equivalent to building our house on a solid foundation. There's an old legend that's this beautiful story of the gift of insults. Have you ever heard of this story? The gift of insults. And so it goes like this. There was once a great warrior. He was old, but he could not be defeated. And even in his age, he always won any battle he was put in. And one day, a young, accomplished warrior was determined to defeat this older, wise man. And so this young warrior threatened the older man to a contest. All of the students of the older man begged him not to take on this young warrior, because what this young warrior was known for was his ability to zero in on his opponent's weak spot and in an instant be able to go toward that opponent's weak spot. And nobody was ever able to stand up to this young warrior beyond that first move, that the opponent would make. And so the old man's students begged him, with your age, yes, you've been great, but do not go up against this man. But he did. And so the young warrior comes to the old man, who's an accomplished, not professional, but accomplished in his skill in battle. And the young warrior is looking for that soft spot, is looking for that place where he can just come in and take advantage. And he's waiting for the old man to take his first move, and the old man does not move. And so the young warrior begins to hurl insult upon insult to this old man. The old man does not move. He is centered, he is calm, he is grounded. This goes on for hours, the young warrior hurling insults, spitting in the old man's face, throwing dirt in his face, and still the old man remains calm and centered and grounded. Eventually, the young warrior becomes so exhausted from having thrown these insults and spitting and throwing dirt in the old man's face that he leaves, embarrassed and ashamed. Of course, the young students come to him, the old man, and they're confused. How could you have stood there like that? And so the old man says to them, if someone comes to you to give you a gift and you do not receive it, to whom does the gift belong? If someone comes to you with a gift and you do not receive it, to whom does the gift belong? In other words, he was saying, I didn't take it in. Wouldn't you like to be able to be even a little bit more like that in your own life? To me, it is, I've used this before in other messages, it's the idea of being emotionally like Teflon, not emotionally like Velcro. What does Velcro do? It attaches. You get hooked, right? You get hooked. And what does Teflon do? It doesn't stick. It just goes right off. What took greater strength to be able to stand and remain so grounded, so steady, so solid, so sure of oneself, so sure of one's identity? So in Aikido, I mentioned that there are this idea of shapes. And that might sound strange when you think of a martial art and shapes, but it's really built around 3 shapes, and then I've added a 4th one. And the shapes are the square, the circle, the triangle, and the one I added was the spiral. And we're going to spend just a little bit of time on the idea of the square. But what the shapes really represent in both the physical aspect of the martial art, but also in the spiritual philosophy of the martial art. So the square represents this idea of being solid, being grounded, having a solid foundation, having a solid base. The circle represents this idea of being able to blend, to flow, to move with rather than against. In Aikido, if you ever actually see it practiced, especially at the higher levels, there's a lot of circular movement. There's a lot of taking the energy of the one that is trying to attack you and actually being able to redirect it, which is what we'll be looking at next week. And then the triangle is the idea of knowing when and where and how to enter into something. Can you see some of the connections with an approach to life? The idea of a solid foundation of being grounded and knowing what that means, the ability to be fluid, to know how to redirect, how to move with the changing circumstances in your life or even just in a day. The idea of the triangle of knowing when to enter into something and being able to initiate movement or initiate action. And then the spiral to me is all about the idea of extending ki or ji, which is this idea of life force that we all have. We all have this incredible spiritual, I call it spiritual, life force and life energy. So if you think about it, what is it that allows us to be stable? What is it that allows that chair to be stable? It has a foundation, right? It's resting on 4 legs. Those 4 legs are helping to distribute, if you're sitting on it, to distribute your weight evenly. What would happen if we took away one of those legs? It would start to wobble, right? And if we took away 2 of those legs, you'd be probably on the floor and I'd be coming over there trying to pick you up, right? There's a foundation, there's a base. In physics, when we look at a house or if we look at a tree and we ask ourselves, how do we strengthen that base? We strengthen the base by either widening the foundation or deepening the foundation or reinforcing it. So widening it or deepening it or reinforcing it. I remember well that seminar so many years ago with Tom Crum, when it was a workshop that he did with us, and he had us all stand up, and he wanted to help us feel in our bodies this idea of being grounded, of being spiritually centered. And so he had us stand up in partnership with one another. And he said, one of you is going to stand still, and the other's going to push against your chest. And you who are pushing, push with all the strength you have, and you who are the one receiving the push, resist against it. And so you could see and feel this back and forth struggle. I'm not going to put you on the spot and have you do it here, but you might practice it out on the patio. And then he said, now I want you to do it differently. And he had us talk about how it felt to be the one pushing and how it felt to be pushed, and how almost all of us wobbled, the ones that were receiving the push, wobbled and were off balance and couldn't maintain our stability. And then he said, all right, I want you to still play the same roles with each other. So if you were the one pushing, you continue to push. If you were the one resisting, you continue to resist. But now, rather than resisting, I want you first to close your eyes for a moment. And I want you to take a few deep breaths in and out. And I want you to imagine that your energy is flowing from the top of your head all the way through your body down into the ground. And this next time, when the person pushes against you, I don't want you to push with your upper body to resist. I want you to feel like your feet and your energy are going all the way to the center of the earth. The remarkable difference that people felt when they didn't resist this way, but they practiced being deeply grounded, stabilized, was remarkable. The conversations that people had afterwards were so rich because many of us were able to get the concept that we held in our mind actually anchored in our body in such a way that it became more real. So that we could then begin to think about when we're in situations of potential conflict with a boss or a neighbor or a child or our spouse, that it's not about resisting at this level, but it's how can I stay rooted and grounded? Does that make sense? Can I stay rooted and grounded? So I was thinking, what does that mean for us beyond what I've already shared with you that I think is incredibly practical? And I really encourage you out on the patio to give it a try, to see what that feels like, to resist the way you would ordinarily, and most people ordinarily resist, and then to come from a place not of physical brute resistance and strength, but of anchoredness, of rootedness, of a solid base that's not dependent upon your stature or your size. For us in unity, we could say that what builds a strong foundation for us is the understanding of our 5 basic principles. The understanding that there is a life energy. Some call it God, some call it the force. It doesn't matter what we call it, but that there is this life force that moves through all of life, including us, whether we believe in it or not. And it is a force of evolution. It is a force of energy. It is a force of life. It is a force for good, and we can learn how to use it. That's a fundamental, basic, foundational belief in unity, that when we live our lives from that understanding, our lives are better. Our second belief is the idea that we are each created with a spark of something incredibly good, not because of any circumstance that we were born into, not because of who we are or what we know or where we live or the color of our skin or our sexual orientation or whether we call ourselves religious or not religious or anything like that. That there is something that we share in common, and it is this spark of life. We can call it the spark of the divine. We can call it the God essence, but we don't have to. But it animates and sustains and is a part of each and every one of us, and it is inherently good. That's a foundational concept, that when we understand it, we have a very solid base on which to live our lives and on which to interact with one another in relationship. It shifts the way we think about one another. It shifts what we stand for and what we believe in and how we interact. Our third is the idea that we are co-creators with this life energy, that at the level of consciousness, what we think and how we feel are really important, and those are at our volitional control. That we can choose how we are going to think. We can choose and practice how we think and how we feel. And that activity shapes the decisions that we make in our lives, and therefore shapes and influences our very destiny and future. That we are not innocent bystanders of life where life is happening to us, but life is happening through us, and we can move with it and cooperate with it. Fourth is our practice in prayer. We believe not in a prayer to a distant God, because we don't believe in an anthropomorphic God or a God in the sky or a God of judgment or any of that. We believe in that life force. But our approach to prayer then is uniting with that energy in thought and making it strong in consciousness by affirming it, by using positive self-talk, if we want to put it in a very, very simplistic way. And that practice helps to build a solid foundation for us. And then our last is that it's not enough to know these things. I mean, that's the starting point, right? Many of us can probably remember when we didn't know any of this stuff, when all of these ideas were new. We might have been very, very young, or it might have been last week. But when we first started to get these ideas, and then we realize it's not enough to know, then we have to live by them. That's where the foundation is made even stronger and wider and is really, really reinforced. I was thinking about this a little further as I was reflecting on the lesson yesterday and the day before. And I thought, for me, beyond the 5 principles of unity that are foundational to my life are also a few other things. And I suppose they fall under some of the concepts and some of the principles of unity. But I want to share just a few of these with you very quickly. And then I want to encourage you to be thinking about how solid is your foundation? And is there something that you feel called to do to strengthen it and reinforce it? Is there some place in your life that you can deepen or widen the base or go back to basics? I remember when ice skating was my life as a young person, and I can remember always wanting to do the fancy jumps and the spins because that was fun and that was pretty. And how often my teacher, my coach, would insist that, okay, great, you landed that double jump. Back then, that was great for me, a double. Now they're doing quads. But anyway, this is a long time ago. But she would say, I want you to go back to the basics. Like what? I want you to stroke. I don't want to stroke. I want to jump and spin. I want you to stroke. I want you to do the figure eights. Why? Because no matter how good you get at the higher levels, it's all built upon what? The foundation. She was a really wise woman. I didn't always like her, but she was really wise, always pulling us back to the foundation, to the basics. I imagine in music, it might be playing scales. It might be going back to some very fundamental pieces, even though you're very accomplished, going back to some of those fundamentals, because the stronger and more perfected they are, the better everything else is that's built on top of that. It's the same thing Jesus said when he was talking about If you do these things, you're like the wise person who built his house upon the rock. It could withstand the winds and the rains and the rising streams. But if you don't do them, if you don't practice them, then you're building your house on a very unstable foundation. So for me, I was reflecting a little deeper, and I'll be winding this up here. To me, building my life on a solid foundation means I have clear values. I have clear values. I know what matters to me. I know what is important to me. And those values drive my choices and my decisions and my actions. I practice honesty and integrity. To me, being a person who is trustworthy is incredibly important. To me, trustworthiness in a relationship is foundational. I don't know if others find this to be true, but I find it is easier to build back love than it is when trust has really, really been broken in a relationship. So for me, that is so foundational, to come from a place of honesty and integrity and be a trustworthy person. Another is to practice personal responsibility, to be accountable, to not shift the blame. If I'm the one that's made the mistake, I admit it. If I tell you I'm going to do something, I will either do it or I will circle back with you and say, this is what happened. Forgive me, and can we renegotiate whatever it was? That's foundational to me in relationships. And the last is that I recognize that I'm a spiritual being and so are you. And that absolutely is fundamental then to how I at least hold myself to trying to be in every relationship. In some, it's really easy. And in some, those sandpaper people to my soul, it's not so easy. But you know what? That's where the practice comes in. That's where we get better and better. So as I bring this full circle and conclude with you, to remain grounded and centered, to be able to be more poised under pressure, requires a solid foundation. And I would just invite you today, and maybe as the week unfolds, just to be open to how you might strengthen or widen or deepen your foundation so that your life is more purposeful, more joyful, and better all around. God bless you. Namaste.